I never believed that one night, one conversation, one single pair of eyes could rearrange everything I thought I knew about myself, about danger, about longing, about the subtle way a heartbeat could whisper a warning and a promise at the same time. But that was before I met her, before I stepped into the marble hall of the Montclair Hotel in Manhattan, before I watched her walk through a crowd like she didn't just own the room. She owned the fear pulsing under the skin of everyone in it even. When they called it admiration, and I only noticed that because I couldn't look away, because even though I was just a temporary bartender hired for the night, a nobody serving champagne to people with last names that weighed more than small countries, I felt something shift in the atmosphere when she walked in, something icy, electric, and strangely intimate, like she had just walked into the room with secrets clinging to her like perfume. I didn't know her name that night. I only knew her presence, tall, elegant, every step unsettlingly calm, long dark hair cascading over her black backless gown that looked like it was stitched from shadows, her pale skin contrasting the darkness around her, and even from across the room I could see how cold her expression was, unreadable, sculpted with precision. Like her face belonged to someone who didn't know what uncertainty felt like, and yet her eyes, there was something there. Something that flickered for a moment when she caught me staring, something that made me freeze with the champagne flute in my hand half tilted, something that felt like danger disguised as curiosity. That night wasn't supposed to be memorable for me. I took the job because I needed money, because my life was falling apart, because my mother was sick and the hospital bills kept coming, because my dreams of studying architecture had dissolved into overdue rent and loan notices. I was just a tired 26-year-old waitress who believed that Manhattan was a place for stories that didn't belong to me. But then that woman, that beautiful, intimidating, untouchable woman looked at me, not with the casual dismissiveness of the wealthy, but with something else, something slow and sharp, something that made me feel like she was measuring me, like she was deciding something I didn't even know was on the table, and I wished I didn't care. I wished I didn't feel something cold and magnetic in my chest when our eyes met, but I did. I tried to look away, to focus on refilling glasses, to not stare at a woman whose entire existence looked like it belonged to a world where everything was silver, carved, and impossible. But I couldn't stop glancing back at her, trying to understand why there was an inexplicable sadness behind such perfectly folded composure, and when she finally approached the bar, when she walked toward me with that same slow, deliberate walk, I forgot how to breathe. She didn't order a drink. She didn't even look at the menu. She just stopped in front of me, her eyes locked onto mine, and I noticed how impossibly green they were, not soft green, but dark emerald, intense, piercing, and she said, very softly, "What's your name?" No one at events like these asked me for my name. They asked for martinis, for napkins, for more ice, but not my name, so I hesitated before whispering, "Carol." She tilted her head slightly, as if she were analyzing the shape of the word, the shape of me, and then she said, "You don't belong behind this bar." It wasn't a question but a statement, one that felt like both an accusation and an invitation, and I didn't know whether to feel exposed or seen, so I simply looked back at her and said, "I don't belong anywhere in this room." Something flickered in her expression then, something like interest or amusement, I couldn't tell, and she said, "You notice things, don't you?" Before I could answer, two men in dark suits approached her, both muscular and tense like they were tracking threats rather than enjoying a gala, and one of them whispered something in her ear, something that made her eyes darken, but she didn't leave, not immediately. Instead, she held my gaze for a breath that felt like eternity, and then she said, "Keep your phone on." That made no sense because I never gave her my number, she never asked, and yet, 2 hours later, after the event had ended, after I had finished cleaning the bar and collecting tips, my phone vibrated with an unknown number and one brief message. Montclair Lounge. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. I should have ignored it. I wasn't the kind of girl who walked into mysterious invitations from beautiful strangers who felt like lightning wrapped in silk, but I went. I told myself it was curiosity, but deep down it was something else, something like gravity, something like fate wearing high heels and an immaculate black coat. When I arrived at the Montclair Lounge the next evening, it was empty except for her, sitting in a quiet corner, wearing a dark green coat that matched her eyes, her expression beautifully bored, like she had been waiting her whole life for something worth her attention, and when she saw me, that boredom faded just slightly, replaced by something I couldn't name. She introduced herself as Vivian Catalan, and when she spoke her name, something in my bones recognized it, not because I had heard it before, but because it felt like the kind of name that belonged to marble, secrets, and quiet power, like it was meant to be carved into history rather than spoken in a conversation. She didn't waste time with small talk. She looked at me, straight into me, as if she had already read my fears, my desperation, my quiet resilience, and she said, very calmly, "I need a wife." I almost laughed. I thought it was a joke, but her expression remained so perfectly serious, so razor-sharp, that laughter died in my throat before it even had the chance. She elaborated, explaining how she needed a wife for exactly 1 year, how it was a contractual arrangement, how I wouldn't have to love her, or pretend anything in private, only maintain appearances in public, attend events, live in her Tribeca penthouse, and follow 3 simple rules. Don't ask questions, don't break character, and don't fall in love. Then she said she would pay me $1 million. I didn't speak, I couldn't. I could only stare at her composure, at the way she said it all so effortlessly, as if she were discussing weather rather than life-changing propositions. She handed me a folder, full of legal documents, spreadsheets, conditions, and a pen, and she said, "You have 3 days to decide, but I think you already know your answer." I wanted to say no. I wanted to say this was insane, reckless, absurd, but instead, I thought of my mother lying in a hospital bed, her smile weaker each day, her hope draining faster than my savings, and my chest felt tight, too tight, and I knew before I even admitted it aloud that I would agree. But what I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't know until months later, was that I had just stepped into something much bigger than money, much bigger than contracts, much bigger than love. I wasn't marrying a businesswoman. I was stepping into the heart of a storm, into the arms of a woman whose cold hands could hold me like I was something fragile, but whose signature could destroy empires. I didn't know who she really was, but I would, and it would change everything. I signed the contract on a rainy Thursday afternoon in a quiet legal office that smelled like polished wood and uncertainty, the pen trembling slightly between my fingers as I wrote my name on paper that felt heavier than it should, paper that didn't just promise money, but a life-changing shift I couldn't yet comprehend. And the moment I signed that last page, the lawyer, a serious-looking woman with steel-gray hair and no visible expression, looked at me and said, "Mrs. Catalan will pick you up tomorrow morning," and my stomach twisted at the sound of that title, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt dangerously close to something that didn't belong to contracts. Permanence. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in my small apartment with peeling paint and humming radiators, staring at my packed suitcase by the door, thinking of my mother, thinking of Vivian, thinking of the way her eyes held stories I didn't understand, and for the first time in months, the fear of bills and eviction and hopelessness wasn't the thing keeping me awake. It was something else, something like anticipation, something like inevitability. She arrived the next morning in a black car that didn't look like it belonged to the city, but to a world where everything was bulletproof and tinted, and when she stepped out, wearing a long beige coat and dark gloves, she looked even more composed than I remembered, her eyes calm but assessing, like she was making sure I hadn't changed my mind, and when our eyes met, she nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that the arrangement had officially begun. The driver took my suitcase, and I stepped into the car, my heart pounding, and as soon as the door closed, the silence between us seemed to fill with something I couldn't name, something not quite tension, not quite comfort, but something undeniably alive. She didn't speak much on the drive, only asked, "Do you have everything you need?" And I nodded, unsure of what everything meant anymore, and for a while, we just drove through Manhattan, the city noise muffled by tinted glass, the world outside feeling distant and irrelevant, and I wondered if this was how she lived, slightly apart, slightly untouchable. When the car finally stopped, it was in front of a tall building in Tribeca, sleek and modern, with glass windows that looked like they reflected another reality, and I felt something tighten in my chest because this wasn't just a place, it was a statement. The lobby was all marble and quiet, Too quiet for a residential building, the kind of quiet that comes from money, from rules, from surveillance, and yet the people at the desk, the security guards, even the residents passing by, all of them didn't just greet her. They watched her, not with admiration, but with something closer to caution, respect edged with terror, and I noticed it, the way their eyes tracked her steps, the way they nodded too quickly, the way their smiles didn't reach their eyes, and when I looked at her, she didn't seem surprised or even aware. This was normal for her. When we entered the penthouse, I realized that luxury didn't always shine. Sometimes it was silent, cold, spacious in ways that swallowed sound, and that was what her home felt like, a place too beautiful to be warm, too perfect to be lived in, and yet it was undeniably hers, because it felt still, controlled, dignified, like her. She gave me a tour, walking through rooms that looked like they were made for magazines, not memories, a living room with tall glass windows showing the Manhattan skyline, a kitchen with marble counters that looked untouched, hallways lit by soft golden lights that made everything look like a dream, and finally, she showed me my room, large, elegant, minimal, with a wardrobe full of clothes that weren't mine but had been selected for me. Clothes that seemed to know the shape of my life before I did. "You will have everything you need here," she said, standing by the door, her tone formal but not unkind, and I found myself wanting to ask her 1,000 questions. Why me? Why this? Why does your life feel like something written on dangerous paper? But I remembered the rules. Don't ask questions. Instead, I simply said, "Thank you," and something in her expression softened, barely, but enough for me to notice that beneath all that elegance, she was human too, maybe even lonely. Days turned into weeks, and I learned to adapt to her world, a world where mornings were quiet and structured, where her assistant arrived at precisely 7:30 a.m. with files and schedules, where strangers in suits came and went, always speaking in low tones, always avoiding my eyes, and I started to notice things, little things, things that didn't belong in the world of real estate and business, things like coded phrases on her phone, men who looked more like soldiers than employees, and late night meetings that didn't sound like business at all. I started to notice how she never truly relaxed, not even in her own home. She sat like a queen guarding a kingdom, always composed, always alert. And yet some nights, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her pacing the hallway, slow, restless steps, like she was haunted by something she could never outrun. We weren't romantic. We weren't friends. We were two strangers pretending to be something else, and yet, sometimes, when we were alone at dinner, when the city lights seeped through the windows and everything felt a little softer, a little less guarded, she would look at me, not like a contract, not like a solution, but like a question, and I felt something inside me begin to tremble, because I didn't know how to look back without wanting more. One night, as we sat by the window overlooking the city, the sky dark and heavy with midnight, I asked her, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't recognize it, "Are you ever scared?" She looked at me then, really looked, and something broke in her silence, something fragile and aching, and she whispered, "Always." That was the first time I felt the danger, not the obvious kind, not the kind with guns and threats, but the kind that came with caring for someone who lived in shadows, the kind that came with wanting to hold someone who wasn't meant to be held, and I realized then that this was not just business, not just survival, not just a contract. This was the beginning of something that had the power to ruin or save us both, and we didn't even know which one yet. I never imagined that silence could weigh more than words, that rooms full of wealthy people could have less warmth than an empty hallway, or that standing next to Vivian Catalan could feel like stepping into a different climate, one where everything was cold, heavy, and fragile all at once. But I learned that quickly on the night she took me to our first public event as her wife. Love what you've seen so far, and want to help me keep creating these awesome stories on this channel? Then subscribe and hit the bell. Your subscription supports the channel and makes sure you get more exciting stories. An elegant private dinner hosted in a penthouse that made even hers look modest, a place filled with chandeliers, marble floors, polished smiles, and people who looked at her like she was both the guest of honor and the impending storm. She didn't warn me about the atmosphere. She only said, "Tonight, you are Mrs. Catalan. That is all you need to know," And there was something in her voice, something sharp, something protective, or maybe possessive, I couldn't tell, but whatever was made my pulse quicken, both with nerves and something unfamiliar, something that felt like I was stepping into water deeper than I knew how to swim. She wore a midnight blue dress that wasn't glittery or loud, but powerful, tailored to her like it was whispered onto her skin, subtle but breathtaking, her hair collected in an elegant twist that left her neck exposed, and I, standing beside her in a silk ivory gown that she had chosen for me, felt less like a prop and more like a reflection she had crafted, something she had shaped to stand by her side, not behind her. When we entered, the air shifted. People turned. Some smiled, respecting her status, but beneath the pleasantries, I saw something else. Wariness. Authority. Fear. No one hugged her. No one touched her. No one treated her like a friend. They addressed her with polite distance, too careful, too controlled, like they were afraid to disturb something delicate, something lethal. I stayed close to her, as instructed, smiling when necessary, greeting when appropriate, but mostly observing, and what I noticed was unsettling. People didn't just respect her, they avoided her, even while they sought her favor. Conversations stopped when she passed. Hands subtly tightened around glasses. Eyes followed her in a way that wasn't admiration but calculation, like they were assessing a threat. She introduced me to a handful of people, always with the same sentence. "This is my wife, Carol," and every time she said it, her voice was perfectly steady, perfectly practiced, but I noticed the reactions, subtle but consistent. Raised eyebrows, tightened jaws, quick glances at me like they were trying to figure out if I was dangerous too, or just naive. One man, older, with silver hair and two friendly eyes, shook my hand and said, "You married her? Brave girl." And although he said it with a smile, it wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. I felt it. I saw it in his eyes before he walked away. As the evening progressed, I started noticing something else, not just how people reacted to her, but how she reacted to them. She didn't smile unless it was necessary. She didn't initiate embraces or greetings. She observed more than she spoke, and behind her calm expression, I sensed constant evaluation, as if every person in that room was either a threat, a pawn, or a liability. It wasn't businesslike. It was strategic. Then, while standing with her near a large glass window overlooking the glowing city, a man approached, tall, confident, too charming to be sincere, and he smiled at her like he knew her secrets, but wasn't afraid of them. "Vivian," he greeted, voice silky. "I see you've finally added a queen to your throne." She didn't smile. "Arthur." The exchange was brief, polite, but I sensed tension, sharp and electric, like something unsaid was hanging between them, something old. Arthur turned to me. "You must be Carol. I've heard nothing about you." Which is fascinating, because Vivian hides nothing that isn't important. I felt her hand briefly touch the small of my back, a gesture that wasn't affectionate, but protective, a warning to him, or maybe to me. I didn't know. His smile widened, but his eyes didn't. "You're either the greatest risk she's ever taken," he said quietly, "or the only thing she's ever wanted to protect." And then he walked away, leaving me confused, unsettled, and strangely breathless, because the word protect echoed in my mind like something fragile and dangerous. Later, when the formal dinner began, we were seated at a long table, surrounded by crystal glasses and gold cutlery and conversations too controlled to feel genuine, and I watched her. Watched how she spoke with precision, how she listened with patience, how she commanded the room without trying, how power seemed to orbit her like gravity. But then something happened that made everything feel more real, more dangerous. Two men at the far end of the table whispered something, glancing at her, and at first it was just uncomfortable, but then I heard one of them murmur under his breath, barely audible, but clear enough. Catalan didn't just inherit real estate. She inherited blood. Vivian's fork paused midair, and although her expression didn't change, her body did, just slightly, but enough for me to know she heard it too. She didn't react. She didn't speak. She just lowered her fork, her posture calm, composed, but there was something different in her eyes, something hard, something cold, something ancient. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. That was the first moment I felt real fear, not of her but for her, because I realized that whatever world she belonged to, it wasn't just built on money or ambition or power. It was built on history, on legacy, on something older, darker, and far more dangerous. When we finally left, the night felt colder than before, the wind sharp against my skin, and we walked silently to the car. Her expression was unreadable again, composed, elegant, distant, and I knew I wasn't supposed to ask, but something inside me felt pulled to her, to the silence between us that felt like a question, and I whispered, "Are you okay?" She looked at me then, eyes softer than they had been all night, and for a split second, I saw something break through, the loneliness, the exhaustion, the truth, but then it was gone, replaced by that familiar, beautiful, impenetrable control, and she simply said, "Some things are better left unheard." She didn't say unanswered. She said unheard. Coldness flickered through me, but so did something else. Empathy, understanding, something dangerously close to tenderness. And that was the night I stopped seeing her as just a mystery. That was the night I started to see her as a woman. A woman who carried secrets not because she wanted to, but because they were hers to protect. And maybe, just maybe, I was becoming one of them. I used to think that danger had a sound, like footsteps in the dark or distant sirens or the thud of a door closing just a little too hard. But I learned that real danger is silent, almost elegant, like the way Vivian Catalan changed when night fell, like the way her voice softened but her eyes sharpened, like the way the world around her seemed to hold its breath when she walked into a room that wasn't meant for normal people. And I realized I wasn't living in her house, I was living in her shadow. It was a quiet Thursday night when I first heard them arrive, the men in black coats with tired eyes and quiet voices, and I wasn't supposed to hear anything because I was upstairs in my room, pretending to sleep, but the low murmur of unfamiliar voices brushed against the hallway walls like smoke, and something inside me knew that this wasn't business, at least not the kind people talked about over champagne and marble tables. I heard her heels before I heard her voice, that slow, measured walk I recognize now, the walk of someone who never rushed because time belonged to her, and when she spoke, her tone wasn't cold or distant, like at public events, but controlled, precise, like language itself was her weapon. The door to the lower lounge was slightly ajar, just enough for me to hear without seeing, and my legs moved on their own, silently, carefully, until I found myself standing by the top of the stairs, hands trembling even though I didn't know why. Her voice drifted up. "He made a move in Newark," she said, her calmness almost terrifying. "I warned him 3 times. 3. Silence. Then a different voice, male, low, uncertain. "There are rumors he's aligned with the Marquez family now. They want territory. They think you won it too easily." The silence that followed was thick, like the air itself tightened around them, and then, finally, her voice again, softer but sharper. "Nothing in my life has ever been easy." Something in those words didn't belong to the woman I knew, or thought I was beginning to know, not the elegant businesswoman or the composed wife for contract, but something older, colder, a truth she never said in daylight. Another voice spoke then, cautious. "What do you want us to do?" I expected her to say something cruel, something ruthless, because I could feel the tension, the fear, but instead, she said something that chilled me more than any threat could. "Remind them who I am." I didn't know what that meant, not yet, not fully, but something about the way those words lingered in the silence made my skin prickle, because they weren't about revenge or anger. They were about legacy, history, about the kind of power that isn't taken but inherited. That was the night I learned that fear didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. The meeting ended after midnight, and I rushed back into my room just before her footsteps approached the stairs, heart pounding, breathing too fast, unsure why part of me wanted to hide, and another part wanted to ask her everything. I heard her pause outside my door, just for a moment, and my heartbeat felt so loud I was sure she could hear it, but she didn't knock, didn't speak. She just stood there for a breath that felt like it lasted a lifetime, and then walked away. The next morning, she didn't mention it. Neither did I. But something had changed. At breakfast, She didn't sit at the end of the long table like she always did. She sat across from me. Closer. Her hair was loose, falling softly over her shoulders, making her look younger, less like the untouchable woman people feared, and more like someone who had once known warmth. She watched me butter my toast with a faint hint of amusement, as though the ordinary act fascinated her. "You're quiet today," she said softly, not accusing, not cold, but almost curious. "I wanted to say, I heard you last night. I heard the part of your life that doesn't belong in penthouses and gala dinners. But instead I said, so are you." She didn't smile, not exactly, but something like it touched her eyes, something faint and private, like a soft echo of something she used to know. "I like the silence," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "In silence, no one expects anything from me." And that, more than anything, made something inside me ache. Because it was the first time she spoke like someone who didn't just command power, but carried it heavily. Days passed, but the shift between us didn't fade. It deepened. She didn't speak of the meeting that night, but she didn't avoid me either. In fact, sometimes I felt like she was letting me see parts of her that others weren't allowed to, not because she trusted me, but because she didn't know how to stop it anymore. One evening, as I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking at the Manhattan skyline glowing like a restless heartbeat, she joined me, standing close but not touching, her reflection in the glass softer than her real form, and she said, almost absent-mindedly, "Do you miss your old life?" I didn't know how to answer that, because my old life was small, lonely, full of struggle, but it was also mine, made of pieces I understood, problems I could name. "I miss knowing who I am," I said quietly. She turned to look at me, and something flickered in her eyes, something raw, something unguarded, like a curtain momentarily lifted. "Money changes how people see you," she said. "Power changes how people treat you. But fear changes who you allow yourself to be." There it was again. Not business. Not elegance. Not the woman in designer gowns and diamond earrings. But something deeper, something that made my chest tighten, even though I barely understood it. Something human. That was the first night I started wondering if she felt lonely even when surrounded by bodyguards, lawyers, board members, and enemies disguised as allies. That was the first night I stopped seeing her as untouchable and started seeing her as unreachable, and that was somehow worse. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was late, almost midnight, and I was heading to the kitchen when I heard voices again. Low, serious, tense. I froze, listening. "We need to talk to her," a man said. "She has to understand the risks. Being tied to you makes her a target." My heart stopped. They were talking about me. Silence. Then her voice, calm but laced with something sharper than anger. "She is under my protection." Another voice, urgent. "That won't stop them. She doesn't understand this world. You need to let her go while you still can." Silence, thick and loaded. Then her voice, softer, almost fragile. "I can't." My pulse hammered against my ribs because those two words didn't sound like business or duty or strategy. They sounded like something she didn't mean to confess, something that belonged to the small, silent hours when truth slips through cracks in the armor. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And after what felt like forever, the voices faded, the men left, and I was alone in the hallway, trembling, wondering when I stopped being just a contract. The next morning, she didn't say a word about it, but she was different. Softer. Protective. Almost careful around me, like I was something she wanted to hold without breaking. And I didn't feel like running. I felt something far worse. I felt like staying. There are moments in life when a person realizes they are standing on a bridge between two worlds, not because they chose to, but because someone opened a door they didn't know existed, and that was how I felt living with Vivian Catalan, suspended between my old life of diner aprons, hospital bills, and restless nights, and this new life of marble floors, guarded elevators, whispered secrets, hushed meetings, and a woman whose presence felt like winter and fire wrapped in the same breath. And I didn't know which world was safer anymore, because one held poverty and pain, but the other held beauty and danger, and worst of all, longing. The morning after I overheard those words, I can't let her go. Something had changed, not visibly, not obviously, but quietly, like the shifting of tides under calm water. Vivian was careful around me, not distant, not cold, but careful, as if she wasn't sure how close she could stand without revealing too much. She no longer walked past me. She paused, she looked, she watched. It wasn't romantic, not yet, not in the way movies portray love, but it was intimate in a way that felt far more dangerous, and that intimacy was made of silences, of glances held 1 second too long, of questions that neither of us asked even though they sat between us like ghosts. One afternoon, we were in the kitchen, not for anything special, just lunch, quiet, simple, but she was there, barefoot, hair down, without her usual elegant armor, and I remember feeling something in my chest soften, because in that moment, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman, tired, lonely, existing. I watched her cut an apple, small precise slices, and I said, without thinking, "Do you ever do anything without control?" She paused, knife midair, then looked at me, not offended, not amused, but contemplative, and she whispered, "I don't know who I am without control." That sentence, so vulnerable, so honest, cracked something open inside me, something I didn't know was waiting to break. But before I could say anything, before I could dive into that crack and ask the real questions, the front door opened, and a woman walked in. She was tall, sharp-eyed, with dark red lipstick and a black coat that looked expensive, and she didn't knock, didn't hesitate, just walked straight into the penthouse like she belonged there, and when she saw me, she paused, studying me like she was identifying a problem. Vivian's posture changed. Instantly. Not softer, not warmer, but harder, straighter, colder. Like armor sliding back into place. "Gabrielle," she said, voice firm, controlled. "You weren't expected until tomorrow." "I figured it couldn't wait," Gabrielle replied, then turned to me, and her eyes were not kind. "So this is her," she said, and not in a friendly way. Not in a curious way. In a way that felt like a warning. Vivian didn't react, but her silence felt like a choice. Gabrielle approached me, her heels echoing on the marble like needles, and she said, "Do you understand whose house you're in? Do you understand what marrying Vivian Catalan means?" I wanted to speak, but something in her tone pinned me in place, and before I could answer, she said something that I wouldn't forget, not for a long time. "This woman doesn't get to live a normal life. She doesn't get to love safely. She doesn't get to keep the people she cares about. People around her become leverage." I felt a chill run through me, not from fear, but from truth. Unavoidable, undeniable truth. She turned to Vivian then. "I'm saying this for the last time. If you care what happens to her, let her go." Silence stretched across the room like a held breath. Vivian didn't look at me. Her jaw was tight, her eyes unreadable. But Gabriel didn't back down. "She doesn't belong in your world, Vivian. No matter how much you wish she did." For the first time since I met her, I saw something that felt like panic flicker in Vivian's eyes. Quick, fragile, gone in a blink, but real. And that terrified me more than any threat could. Because panic meant loss of control. And if she lost control, that night, Vivian didn't join me at dinner. She stayed in her office, door closed. No guards. No visitors. No noise. Just silence heavy enough to feel like confession. At almost midnight, I found her staring out the floor-to-ceiling window, her coat still on, her hair slightly undone, her eyes hollow, distant, exhausted. She didn't look at me when she said, "People think I built this life for power. They're wrong." I stayed silent, listening. "Power was never the goal," she said, voice soft, tired. "Power was the price." I didn't know what to do, what to say, so I did the one thing she hadn't expected. I stepped closer. Not touching. Just close enough for her to feel it.
And she didn't step back.
"If you could leave," I whispered, "would you?" She looked at me then. Really looked. And her voice, low, fragile, broke something inside me. I don't know how. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. And the most heartbreaking. We didn't talk after that, not with words. But silence had a language of its own, and that night, Without touching, without confessing, without naming it, something shifted. Something that neither of us could deny anymore. Not contract. Not obligation. Not protection. Something else. Something that felt like gravity. And I realized then, with a kind of quiet terror, that I wasn't just living in her shadow anymore. I was stepping into her world. Not because I had to,
but because I wanted to.
and that might have been my greatest mistake. There are moments that do not feel like they belong to time, moments that unfold slowly, quietly, in the delicate spaces between words and touch and breath, moments that do not announce themselves but simply happen, and later you realize everything changed there, in that silence, in that closeness, without any dramatic gesture, without any kiss, without anything you could define. Except you know in your bones that something irreversible began, and that was what happened between me and Vivian. One night when the city outside glowed like embers, and the penthouse was too quiet, too large, too full of secrets. I had begun to understand this life wasn't just glamour and marble. It was structured, controlled, watched. I had begun noticing small things. Two men stationed near the lobby every day, always different but always the same alert posture. Unmarked cars idling on the street below, tinted windows facing the building, men who came to speak with Vivian who never used names, only initials and nods, and the way she never sat with her back to a door, even in her own home. Not once. Protection wasn't security, it was surveillance. And I was no longer invisible inside it. That afternoon, a man I had never seen before, wearing a dark coat and an expression too serious, approached me in the hallway near the elevators. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't smile. He simply looked at me with sharp, assessing eyes and said, "You should know, if they can't get to her, they'll go after you." I froze. Not from shock, but from the quiet realization that I had already known that, somewhere deep down, but hearing it aloud made it real in a way that words sometimes do. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. He wasn't warning me to be kind. He was warning me to be careful. That night, I couldn't sleep. The penthouse felt different, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I walked to the living room near midnight, thinking I would find emptiness, but instead I found her.
Vivian.
Sitting by the tall windows, wrapped in a soft gray sweater instead of her usual tailored armor, barefoot, legs folded quietly beneath her, a glass of untouched wine in her hand, her hair loose and messy in a way I had never seen before, curtain of dark silk falling over one shoulder. She looked softer. Not defenseless, not broken, but tired.
Human.
She didn't turn when she heard me. She didn't look startled or guarded. She just said, quietly, without taking her eyes off the city, "Couldn't sleep?" It took me a moment to realize my voice didn't want to work, and when it finally did, all I said was, "Neither could you." She said nothing for a long moment. The air felt careful. Then she whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're living a life you didn't choose?" The question surprised me, not because of what she asked, but because of who asked it. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked slowly to the window, then stopped, not too close but close enough. And I whispered, "Every single day."
She finally looked at me then.
Those deep green eyes no longer sharp, no longer cold, but almost searching. Not for information, not for strategy, but for something quieter. Something like understanding. She glanced at the space beside her on the long window seat, and it wasn't an order. Not even an invitation. It was permission. I sat, not touching her,
Not speaking.
just existing in the same quiet. And that alone felt like something intimate. We didn't talk at first. We just sat, staring at Manhattan glowing below, breathing the same night air, sharing space without rules. And then, slowly, without looking at me, she whispered, "Most people want something from me. Money. Influence. Protection.
Fear.
But you," she hesitated, searching for the right words. "You just want to understand me, even when you shouldn't." My heartbeat echoed through my entire body.
I didn't know what to say.
She continued, voice lower now, like the confession of something she never meant to say. "I don't know if that makes you safe, or in more danger than anyone." I didn't think.
I just spoke. Softly.
Maybe both. She looked at me again, this time fully, and something in her gaze felt different. Not analytical, not guarded, but open, tired, vulnerable. She rested her wine glass on the floor, took a slow breath, then did something that felt more intimate than any kiss. She let her head rest gently against the back of the window frame, and quietly, carefully, she said, "I don't remember the last time I felt calm." The confession felt like a secret, a deep one she hadn't meant to release. And for some reason I felt tears forming, not because of sadness, exactly, but because of the strange fragility of the moment, because in all that marble, all that silence, all that danger, here she was. Just a woman trying not to shatter. I didn't touch her. I didn't speak. Neither of us did. The room seemed to understand that silence was safer, softer, more honest. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I lost track. And then gently, so gently, it felt like a thought rather than a movement, she shifted slightly, just enough that her shoulder brushed mine. Not a full touch. Not deliberate. Just close enough to feel the warmth of her skin through the light fabric. And though nothing dramatic happened, no dramatic confession, no sudden embrace, I felt something shift. Something real. Something neither of us could take back. I turned my head slightly, and she did too, and I realized then that emotional closeness doesn't start with a kiss, or with a confession. It starts with the permission to exist in someone's silence, without needing to fill it. Her eyes held mine. No shield. No distance. No elegance. Just truth. Quiet, cautious, terrifying, beautiful truth. And I understood then, whatever we were becoming, whatever danger it carried, had already begun. Without us saying a word. Without touching more than a shoulder. Without deciding. Sometimes connection isn't chosen. It's recognized. Outside, the city kept glowing. Inside, so did we.
Quietly. Carefully.
Recklessly. I used to believe that fear arrived all at once, like a door slamming open or glass shattering or footsteps thundering toward you, but I was learning that real fear didn't announce itself. It seeped quietly, moved slowly, like a whisper behind your ear, or the way a room could suddenly feel too still, too silent, too full of things unsaid, and that was how it felt living with Vivian now, like the calm before a storm that no one could see, but she felt in her bones. Everything shifted after that night by the window, when our shoulders touched and silence became something intimate instead of empty. She didn't hide from me as much. She didn't build walls with her eyes anymore. Some mornings, she would walk into the kitchen without her armor, hair loose, no makeup, wearing calm instead of control, and she looked softer like that, like a person rather than an empire, and sometimes when she passed by me, our hands would almost touch. Not enough to be deliberate, not enough to be accidental. The almost was louder than any touch could have been. But closeness brings eyes, and eyes bring risk. The men around her noticed the shift long before either of us was ready to name it. They watched her differently when she looked at me. That's when protection began to feel like surveillance. Not just from outside, but inside her world too. One of them was tall, sharp-eyed, too quiet, too observant. I had seen him at events in the elevator by the door. He didn't smile. He didn't blend. He watched.
He saw.
One evening, when Vivian was in a meeting downstairs, I walked into the hallway toward the elevator, and he was there, just standing like he was waiting for someone or maybe for me. I tried to walk past him, but he stepped forward, not blocking my path, but making sure I stopped. He looked at me with a kind of assessing calm, not cruel, not threatening, worse. He was certain. "You shouldn't get close to her," he said quietly. I didn't answer, unsure what he meant, unsure how much he knew. His voice remained steady. "People like her don't get to keep the things they care about." I swallowed. "Are you warning me?" He shook his head.
"No."
"I'm warning her." That sentence didn't make sense, not fully, until later. That same night, Vivian and I were in the living room, working quietly. She was reading through documents, something about meetings in Montreal, and I was sketching little watercolor studies, not because I was an artist, but because sometimes putting shapes on paper helped me remember I had once dreamed of designing buildings instead of surviving inside them. She glanced at the paper in my hand, and I watched her expression change. Just slightly, but enough. You used to draw, she said softly. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Before, I didn't finish. I didn't need to. She understood. Her gaze lingered on the sketch, and there was a softness in her eyes I had never seen anyone look at me with, a softness that felt like understanding, like memory, like wanting. You should draw more, she whispered, and I swear the way she said it felt like protection. Not from danger, but from forgetting myself. That was the closest we had come to something raw, something unguarded. But vulnerability never goes unnoticed. And delicate things don't stay protected for long in a world made of glass and knives. The next night it happened. Not something huge. Not something cinematic. Something quiet. Something terrifying. Something real. A meeting. Not unusual.
Late.
Very late. Around midnight. I heard voices downstairs, controlled, low, strategic. I recognized some. The man from the hallway was there. Then another one, older, voice rougher, sharper. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I did. She is becoming weak. Silence. Heavy. Then his voice again. You are too visible, Vivian. You're slipping. You're being seen.
Her voice was calm. Too calm.
By who? He didn't hesitate. By her. Silence carved into silence. My heartbeat kicked into something too fast, too loud. The older man continued. She makes you visible. She makes you human. Humans bleed. Humans break. And the moment they see you as human, you lose everything your name protects. Something cold brushed through the air. Not just tension. Not just warning. Something old. Something dangerous. Then, slowly, I heard Vivian speak, and her voice no longer sounded like silk or winter air or careful elegance. It had something else now. Something I hadn't heard before. Something fierce. Be careful how you speak about her. That sentence felt like a shift. A fault line cracking beneath marble floors. And he felt it too. The man paused for a long moment, then said, "Ah, you're already choosing." I didn't hear what happened after that, because footsteps approached, coming up the stairs.
Toward me.
I shouldn't have been standing there, but I couldn't move.
Couldn't breathe.
And then she saw me, not surprised, not angry, something worse. She looked like I had just walked too close to the edge of something and she didn't know whether to pull me back or let me fall.
She didn't speak.
Neither did I. She just looked at me, and I swear, there was something in her eyes that wasn't polished or composed or elegant. It was fear, real fear, not of being seen, but of losing something she didn't know how to keep. She stepped closer, almost a step too close. And there was nothing cold left in her expression, nothing powerful. She didn't look like a queen. She looked like someone whose world was too heavy to carry alone. Her fingers didn't touch me, but they almost did. That almost again. That trembling, quiet, terrifying almost. She whispered, "You should be asleep." But the way she said it didn't sound like dismissal. It sounded like protection, like plea, like apology. I whispered back, "You're not." And her breath caught. For a moment, we just stood there. No marble between us. No contract. No distance. Just breath. And silence. And something we didn't know how to stop. Her hand lifted slightly, not reaching for me, not touching, but hovering. Close enough to feel warmth. Close enough to feel danger. Not physical danger. Emotional. The worst kind. She didn't touch me, but she stayed close enough that I knew, if I moved even an inch closer, something would change forever. She whispered my name then, not formally, not like business.
Softly. Carefully.
Like a secret. Carol, my name had never sounded like that before. I felt something pull inside me. Dangerous. I didn't move closer.
Neither did she.
But neither of us stepped away. We stayed in that stillness, not touching, not speaking, but knowing. Connection is not always touch. Sometimes it's choosing not to run. And neither of us ran. That night, I couldn't sleep. Because that was the moment I finally understood whatever this was, it wasn't pretend anymore. Not for me. And definitely not for her. I had always believed that a first kiss was something you anticipated, something you prepared yourself for, something that arrived with a certain predictability, either through words or gestures or glances that lingered too long. But nothing about the moment I realized I was going to kiss Vivian Catalan felt predictable. Nothing felt rehearsed or expected. It felt like gravity, like being pulled, quietly, relentlessly, towards something you didn't plan but knew, deep down, was always going to happen. It began quietly, like most irreversible things do, not with a dramatic event, but with the sound of rain. It was late, maybe after 1 a.m, the storm outside soft but persistent, Manhattan glowing beneath clouds like embers, and the penthouse, usually filled with quiet tension and unspoken things, felt different, softer, heavy but gentle, like a secret waiting to be shared. She was in the study, not working, just sitting on the floor near the window, legs stretched out, back against the wall, watching the rain streak down the glass like it was telling her something she couldn't quite hear. She wasn't wearing her armor that night. No heels, no diamonds, no posture carved from marble, just soft gray sweater sleeves pulled over her hands, hair tied loosely, bare feet on the hardwood floor, and it was the most disarming thing I had ever seen. She didn't see me at first, and I didn't announce myself. I simply stood there in the doorway, watching her in stillness, watching the silence around her like it was something alive. Then, without turning, she said quietly, "You don't have to stand there." I stepped inside. Slowly.
Carefully.
Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to break the moment.
She didn't look at me.
She just lifted her gaze slightly and said, "Sit." Not an order. Not a request. Something in between. I sat across from her, near the window, legs folded, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, but not close enough to touch. I didn't speak. She didn't either. We just listened. To the rain.
To breath.
To silence. And then, after a long, heavy, gentle pause, she whispered, "I used to love the rain." The softness in her voice made my chest tighten. "Used to?" I said quietly. She finally looked at me then, and there was no guardedness in her eyes tonight, only quiet exhaustion and something fragile. "Rain feels honest," she said, voice slow, reflective. "It never tries to be anything else. It just falls." She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't remember the last time I felt that way." I didn't know what to say, and so I didn't say anything at all. Sometimes silence was kinder than questions. She looked out the window again, and in the reflection, I saw something I had never seen before. Not elegance. Not intimidation. Not control. I saw loneliness. Deep, heavy loneliness. The kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from being surrounded. Surrounded by walls, people, protection, expectations, history, and still feeling unseen. The kind of loneliness money, power, and marble floors can never cure. And I knew, with an ache I couldn't explain, that I wanted to understand every quiet, hidden part of her. Not for curiosity. Not for danger. Not for thrill. But because I could feel that she had lived a very long time without being looked at gently. And that broke something inside me. Without thinking, without planning, I shifted closer. Just slightly. Just enough for her to feel I was there. With her. Not watching.
Not studying. Just being.
And she felt it. She turned to look at me, slowly, carefully, as if turning too quickly might shatter something fragile. Her eyes, those impossibly green eyes, weren't cold tonight. They were as soft as the rain. I wasn't sure who moved first. Maybe I leaned in. Maybe she did. Maybe neither. Maybe it was gravity. But suddenly, I was close enough to see the way her breathing changed. To see the way her eyes softened, widened, held mine like she wasn't sure whether to look away or hold on. Her hand lifted, not fully, not reaching to touch me, just hovering, as if giving me every opportunity to walk away. And that was when I knew. This wasn't seduction. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't a game, or control, or pretend. This was a choice. The most dangerous kind. The kind you can't undo. I inhaled slowly, and she watched my breath like it was something holy. Then, softly, almost soundlessly, I whispered her name. Vivian. It was barely a word. It was a question, a confession, a warning, an invitation. Her eyes flickered. Fear, desire, hesitation, surrender. And then she whispered, Carol. And in that moment, everything between us, the contract, the rules, the danger, the warnings, the almosts, fell away. And finally, beautifully, inevitably, I kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't anything like what I expected. It was slow, careful, trembling, like touching something sacred, like holding something precious, like learning the shape of a person by the shape of their breath. Her lips were cold at first, then warm, then trembling. Soft, searching, not pulling, not controlling. Just learning. And I realized that was what this was. Not passion. Not romance. Not even desire. It was learning. Learning how to let someone touch the parts of you you've spent a lifetime hiding. Her hand finally touched my face, just one. Barely there.
Soft.
Terrified. And she didn't pull me closer. She just kept it there. Gentle. Like she couldn't believe I was real. When we finally pulled away, slowly, breathlessly, we didn't speak. We just stared. Not like lovers. Not like strangers. But like two people who had finally seen each other clearly. As if for the first time. She looked at me like she was memorizing something. Something she thought she wouldn't be allowed to keep. And I looked at her and understood. This wasn't the moment everything changed. This was the moment everything became true. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, so did our walls. There are moments that don't end when they are over. They linger. They echo. They change the ground beneath you even after you walk away, and that is what the kiss did. It didn't end when our lips parted. It didn't finish when silence returned. It didn't fade when we finally stood, quietly, gently, with careful breaths and trembling hands. It stayed. Not loud, not dramatic, not demanding. It stayed like a secret, like something so fragile we were both afraid to touch it again too quickly. Nothing was said after the kiss. No declarations, no apologies, no promises. She just looked at me, steady, quiet, as if she was trying to memorize the moment before the world asked her to pretend it never happened. Eventually, she stood, slowly, deliberately, like she wasn't sure her legs would hold, and instead of walking away, she paused.
Turned.
Looked back at me with something that felt like a vow, even though she didn't say a word. And then she left. But something stayed. The next morning, everything looked the same, but felt different. The penthouse was quiet, calm, elegant, but the air between us had changed. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, not in silk or polished elegance, but in a simple cream sweater, hair down, barefoot again. She turned when she heard me, and for the first time since living there, she didn't just look at me. She allowed herself to be seen. "Good morning," she said softly, not the composed tone she used in public, not the controlled tone she used in meetings, but a gentler one, cautious, almost tender. I said good morning back. Her gaze lingered for a second too long, the same way it had the night before. Neither of us mentioned the kiss, but it existed. Between every word, in every silence. She made coffee for herself. Then, without asking, she made coffee for me. She didn't look at me when she placed it on the counter beside my hand, but her fingers brushed mine, just slightly. Not accidental. Not careless. Deliberate. Small. Real. I felt my breath catch. She noticed. But she didn't pull away. Later that day, she had a meeting on the lower floor of the penthouse with several men I had never seen before, men with scars rather than suits, men who watched doors more than people, men who didn't look like they belonged to real estate. I walked past them on my way to the library room, and I felt their eyes on me. Not curious, not admiring. Assessing. Calculating. One of them, older, with silver at his temples, quietly said to another, "She's the one."
I didn't know what that meant.
But I felt it. And suddenly, the air felt colder. When the meeting ended, I saw one of them speaking to Vivian just before leaving. He didn't smile. He simply said, "If they know she matters, they will use her." Vivian's expression didn't change. Not visibly. But something in her eyes flickered, and it wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for me. She didn't answer him.
She didn't need to.
Later that afternoon, I found her in the study, standing by the window, arms crossed, not in anger, not in impatience, but in the kind of posture that looks like someone trying very hard not to break something fragile. I hesitated, then walked in. She didn't turn, but she spoke. "I can protect myself," she said quietly. "I always have."
She paused.
Her voice softened. Protecting someone else is different. My breath stilled. She finally turned, and her gaze was raw, unmasked. Something profoundly unguarded looked back at me. I didn't touch her.
I didn't speak.
I just stood in front of her, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence. She looked almost lost. "Are you scared?" I whispered. She looked at me then, and I swear, for the first time, her eyes held something that looked almost like pleading. "Not for me," she whispered back. Silence. And then she stepped closer, very slowly, until I could feel her breathing. Until there was no marble, no money, no empire between us. Only warmth.
And fear.
And something that felt dangerously close to hope. I thought maybe she would kiss me again. She didn't. This time, she simply reached for my hand, not quickly, not impulsively, but gently, almost reverently, like she was asking permission without asking aloud.
I didn't pull away, and our fingers intertwined. We stood there like that,
hand in hand. No words, no explanations, no denial, just a quiet, terrifying, beautiful acknowledgement. Something real was happening. And real things are never safe. That night, as I walked through the hallway toward my room, I heard two guards talking near the elevator, unaware that I could hear. "She thinks she can protect the girl," one said. "She doesn't understand," the other replied. "No one can protect someone from her life. Not even her." I went to sleep with those words echoing in my mind. The next day, Vivian didn't act differently. She didn't make a speech. She didn't step back. She didn't apologize. She simply stayed closer, walked beside me instead of ahead, watched more carefully when we entered rooms, kept me on her left side, the side furthest from doors, from whoever might approach. It wasn't possessiveness. It wasn't control. It was protection.
Quiet.
Strategic. Intentional. One morning, as we left an elevator that opened directly into the lobby, a man, someone unknown, someone too bold, approached me directly, bypassing her entirely. He smiled, not warmly, and said, "So you're the girl." Before I could speak, before I could react, before I could even blink, Vivian stepped between us, not beside, not behind, but in front of me. Fully.
Completely.
As a barrier. As a shield.
Her voice was low. Calm.
Deadly calm. "Walk away." He hesitated. And in that single moment, I saw what everyone else had always seen in her. Power. The kind not worn but lived.
Carried. Survived.
The kind that didn't need guns or threats or raised voices. The kind that made men step back.
Slowly. Carefully.
He left. She didn't move for a full 5 seconds. Only then did she turn to me. And she didn't say, "Are you okay?" or "Don't be scared."
She just looked at me.
Long, quiet.
Real.
And said, "If you stay, you don't just love me." Her voice was soft.
Honest. Raw.
"You belong to me." And though she said it like a warning, for the first time it didn't feel like one. There are moments when silence is not empty but full, filled with warning, with memory, with the shadows of words that were never spoken, and that was what the silence felt like in the penthouse the day everything changed. The day I finally understood that loving Vivian, choosing her, wasn't just a matter of staying. It was a matter of surviving the consequences of staying, because in her world, devotion wasn't romantic. It was dangerous, and love wasn't a promise. It was a liability. That morning felt different from the moment I woke up.
Too still.
Too quiet. Even the light felt strange, cold, muted, like it knew something that I didn't yet. I stepped into the hallway, and everything looked the same. The marble, the art, the long curtains, but the atmosphere had shifted. Something had happened. Something had arrived. I didn't know what it was. Not yet. Vivian was in her office when I found her, standing instead of sitting, hands clasped behind her back, staring at something on the desk. She didn't turn when I entered. She didn't greet me, but she spoke, her voice low, perfectly controlled, but not calm. Never calm. "Don't react," she said quietly. I didn't understand, until I stepped closer, until I saw it. A single white envelope. No writing, no stamp, no seal, just a symbol, drawn faintly on the outside. A thin red line, diagonal, almost invisible. But whatever it meant, it was bad. Very bad. She looked at it like it was a ghost. Or a promise. Or both. "Someone got past security," she said softly. "They didn't break in. They didn't take anything. They simply left it." "For you?" I whispered. She didn't answer. And that was answer enough. The air felt sharp. Heavy. My heart didn't just beat. It warned. In the silence that followed, something inside me shifted. Fear wasn't new. But this was different. This wasn't fear of her. This was fear for her. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were not panicked, not exactly. But they were tired. Heavy. Like she had known this moment would come. And worst of all, like she had been waiting for it. "What does it mean?" I asked. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, very quietly, "It means people are no longer just watching." I understood. This was not curiosity. Not rumor. Not speculation. It was a message. Not written in words, but in presence. Someone had been in this home. This sanctuary. This fortress. And they had not touched her money, her documents, her art. They had touched only what mattered most. Safety. That afternoon, everything changed. More guards. Less silence. Doors that had been open were now closed. Cameras repositioned. Windows checked. Everything locked. Except one thing. Her. She was different now. Not cold. Not closed off. Not that terrifying controlled version of herself she used in public. No. Now she was something else. Something far more dangerous. Calm. Very calm. The kind of calm you only see before lightning strikes. But with me, she was different. Not softer. Not warmer. But something almost terrifyingly gentle. She found me in the living room, sketching quietly, trying to make sense of the world with paint and empty paper. She sat beside me, not across, not away. Beside. For the first time, without leaving space. I felt the warmth of her leg beside mine. Real. Deliberate. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at what I was drawing. Rooftops. Distance. Light. A home that didn't exist. "Is that a real place?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "No. Just somewhere that feels safe." Silence. Then, quietly, she said, "Safety isn't a place." I looked at her. Her eyes didn't waver when she whispered, "It's a person." My breath caught. The moment stretched. Not romantic. Not dramatic. Just raw. Real. She didn't say it was her. She didn't say it was me. But something inside both of us already knew. The rest of the day unfolded slowly. Carefully. But that night was when I truly saw who she was. And what I had stepped into. It was almost 2 a.m. when I woke up. Not from a dream. From something real. A sound. Soft. Controlled. Deliberate. Voices. Muffled. I stepped into the hallway. Saw a light below. I didn't call for her. I didn't even think. I just walked, slowly, quietly, to the landing above the open living room. And there she was. Standing near the piano. Not elegant. Not composed. Dangerous. Beautifully dangerous. 3 men stood in front of her. Not well-dressed. Not polite. Quiet. Hard. Their presence didn't feel like business. It felt like history. I wasn't supposed to see this. But I did. And no one stopped me. Not even her. They spoke quietly. Words I didn't fully understand.
Territory.
Promise.
Blood. Name.
One of them pointed, without touching, to a family ring on her hand. And then I understood. She wasn't just leading something. She had inherited something. Not money. Not property. Power. Old power. The man said something I'll never forget. You carry his name. You carry his chair. Now you must carry what he did. Silence. Her eyes were cold now. But her voice was not cruel. It was something worse. Something absolute. I carry what I must, she said. But I do not carry what breaks me. And then he turned, looked at me, like he had known I was there all along. His next words weren't said to her.
They were said to me.
In her world, he said quietly, you are either someone she protects or someone she loses. Then he left. The others followed. She didn't move. Not for a long time. I didn't know whether to go to her or stay back. But then slowly she looked up. At me. Not surprised. Not angry. But something else. Something I finally understood. She wasn't protecting herself from me. She was protecting me from understanding too soon. But it was too late. The truth was here. I walked down the stairs. Step by step. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew whatever this was, I didn't want to walk away from it. When I reached her, she finally spoke.
Softly.
You weren't supposed to see that. I didn't look away. But I did. Silence. Then I said the one thing that mattered. I'm still here. She exhaled. Not like relief. Not like surrender. Like she had been holding her breath for a very long time. And finally let it go. She didn't touch me.
She didn't have to.
She just whispered one word. Not wife. Not contract. Not Carol. Stay. And it wasn't an order. It was a question. And somehow an answer too. There are moments when love does not arrive gently. Moments when it does not ask permission, when it does not wrap itself in warmth and softness and poetry, but instead arrives like a threat, like a risk, like a turning point that whispers you must choose. And that was what being near Vivian felt like now, not peaceful, not calm, but like a choice I had been drifting toward without realizing, a choice that could no longer be ignored, not by me, not by her, because after the night she said, stay, something shifted permanently, something invisible but powerful, like gravity changing direction, and suddenly it wasn't about whether I could handle her world, it was about whether I wanted to step into it willingly. She didn't kiss me again. She didn't touch me more than a brush of fingers or a brief moment of shared closeness, but something deeper than physical affection had begun, something wordless, delicate, terrifying, and that was what made it real. Some mornings she would pass by me and pause, not to speak but to watch, to memorize, to be present, and I began to notice she didn't look at me like she looked at anyone else, not like someone she had to protect, but like someone she had chosen to protect, and that was different. And that difference was everything because chosen meant risk and risk meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant danger, not from others, but from desire. That week, things changed. Not in big ways. In quiet, irreversible ways. She began to send people away earlier, closing meetings before midnight instead of at 2 a.m. She no longer attended certain gatherings unless absolutely necessary, and when she did go, she always came back before morning. She was home. And she was different. She worked less at night. She walked barefoot more. She asked questions, simple questions like, did you sleep well? Or, what colors do you like? Or, what were you before you were afraid? And those questions weren't casual. They were doors. She wasn't just protecting me anymore. She was letting me in. But the world around us, her world, was not blind. People noticed. Her advisors, her protectors, her people, not family by blood, but family by consequence, began to watch more closely. One afternoon, I went downstairs to retrieve a book, and I heard them. Not whispering. Quiet, but not whispering. They wanted her to hear. She has become a liability, one said. No, another replied. She has become something worse. She has become important. Silence. Then, important things get taken. And if they cannot take her, they will take the girl. I should have been afraid. But instead, I felt something else. A calm I could not explain. Because I finally understood what they didn't know. I wasn't just something she protected. I was someone who had begun to understand her. That night, Vivian knocked on my door. She never knocked. She always waited, always approached, never intruded. But this time, she knocked.
Softly.
Carefully. When I opened the door, she didn't enter. She just stood there, hair loose, simple black sweater, no jewelry, no posture, nothing elegant or guarded. Just raw, silent, fragile. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, she said something I didn't expect. I need to show you something. There was no fear in her eyes. But there was something else. A decision. We went downstairs. To her study. To a room I had never really seen in truth, though I had passed it 100 times. She unlocked a drawer and took out something small, silver, sharp-edged with age, a ring. Not beautiful. Not polished.
Heavy. Worn. Old. She didn't hand it to me.
She just held it and looked at it as if it could speak. I didn't want this, she said softly. I never wanted this. I didn't ask what it was. I knew. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't decoration. It was legacy. And she wasn't showing me the ring. She was showing me the weight. They think this ring means power, she said. They think it means authority, command, control. But that's not what it means. Her voice softened. It means I survived him. It means I inherited everything he built, including the enemies, including the ghosts. Her father, not mentioned often, barely ever, but present, always present. You think I'm strong, she whispered. But the truth is, I'm still recovering. I'm still trying to unlearn fear while everyone expects me to own it. I swallowed. She wasn't speaking like a leader now. She was speaking like a daughter. And suddenly, all the elegance, all the silence, all the control, it wasn't armor to hide power. It was armor to hide pain. She finally looked at me. I don't want you to be part of this. My heart stilled. This isn't your world, she said softly. Not your burden. Not your battle. I brought you here for protection, stability, appearance, not this. Her voice broke slightly, just slightly, but enough. You don't deserve this kind of closeness to danger. Or to me. I didn't speak immediately. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't argue. I simply stepped closer. And then I did the one thing she would never expect from me. I spoke her name, softly,
gently,
not like a plea, not like accusation, but like truth. Vivian, I whispered. Stop deciding for me. Her breath caught. And suddenly, her elegant control faltered. Not dramatically, not visibly, but quietly. In the eyes, in the breathing, in the stillness. I wasn't angry. I wasn't desperate. I was calm. Completely, strangely calm. You keep trying to protect me, I said softly. But maybe what you don't understand is that I'm not afraid of being close to you. I'm afraid of being away from you. Silence. Real silence.
Heavy.
Tender.
Alive.
She stepped back, not out of rejection, but out of disbelief. Because she had not expected me to choose. Not willingly. Not knowingly. Her next words were a whisper. You don't survive my world by accident, Carol. I nodded. Then I won't survive it by accident. I will survive it by choice. And that was the moment everything truly changed. Not the night we kissed. Not the night someone left a warning in her home. Not the first time she tried to protect me. This was the moment. Because love in her world was not an emotion. It was a decision. A declaration. A risk. And now it had been made. Not by her, but by me. She didn't touch me.
She didn't kiss me.
But she looked at me, long, raw, searching, and in that look, I saw something that scared me more than danger.
Hope.
Hope in a woman who had spent her whole life surviving without it. And when she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I had ever heard. Then don't survive it alone. That night, she didn't send me away. She didn't disappear into her meetings. She didn't shield herself with silence. She simply stayed near me. Not touching. not speaking, just present. And in her world, presence was intimacy. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in her shadow. I felt like I was standing beside her. And that was more powerful than any kiss. People believe danger announces itself with noise, shouts, alarms, glass breaking, guns raised. But the truth is, real danger arrives in silence. It arrives in a phone that rings only once, in a hallway that suddenly feels too still, in a voice that speaks too softly, in the knowledge that something is about to happen and nothing will ever be the same after it does. The threat didn't come loudly. It came quietly, subtle, precise, brutal not in volume, but in intention. I had gone downstairs to the lobby alone, something I rarely did anymore, mostly to get fresh air and escape the constant tension that had begun to live in the penthouse walls. The air was cold and soft outside, the kind of cold that doesn't hurt but wakes you up. There were guards nearby, as always. They never spoke to me unless necessary, never interfered unless needed. But today, their presence didn't feel reassuring. It felt like a warning. A black car pulled up in front of the building. Not flashy, not expensive looking, just quiet. Too quiet. The back door opened. A man stepped out. I had seen him once before. Not at a party. Not in a meeting. In a photo. In a file Vivian had once left open for a moment too long. He walked toward me, not fast, not slow, like time wasn't the same for him as it was for everyone else. He didn't look cruel. He didn't look angry. He looked certain. That was worse. One of the guards stepped forward. The man lifted one finger. Just one. The guard stepped back, like it was an order. The man didn't look at him. He looked at me and smiled. Softly. Politely. Terrifyingly. "You're the one," he said gently, like he was telling me the weather. I didn't answer. He continued. "You don't understand her world." He stepped closer. "You think it's about protecting you." Another step. "It's not." His voice softened. "It's about owning you." My breath caught. He leaned in just enough that his voice reached only me. "And if she owns you, someone else will try to take you." He didn't threaten me. He didn't hurt me. He simply stepped back, nodded to the guards like he had just attended a meeting, returned to his car, and left. No violence. No noise. Pure intent. Pure message. When I went upstairs, I expected fear. I expected panic. But what I saw in her eyes was something far more dangerous. Calculated. Contained. Silent fury. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what he said. She already knew. Someone had told her. She was standing by the glass windows when I entered, still as stone, still as a secret. When I spoke her name, she didn't answer. She only said one thing. "You should not have been alone." I didn't argue. She turned to look at me, and I watched something change behind her eyes, like a door opening to a room she kept locked, not out of pride, but out of necessity. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She simply said, very quietly, "They think weakness is something that can be stolen." She walked closer. Slowly. Carefully. "But they don't understand." And then she looked at me in a way she had never looked before. Not soft. Not gentle. Not hesitant. But certain. "You are not my weakness." Something inside me trembled. "You are my boundary." Silence filled the space between us. Boundaries weren't fragile. Boundaries weren't easily broken. Boundaries were lines people did not cross and survive. That evening I saw something strange. Slowly, one by one, all her people, guards, advisors, loyalists, entered the penthouse. Not for a meeting. Not for a briefing. For presence. They stood. Quiet. Waiting. She was making a decision. Not political. Not strategic. Personal. And personal decisions, in her world, held more power than any signature. She didn't stand behind her desk now. She stood in front of it. Not higher. Not above. Among them. "There will be attempts," she said simply. "No theatrics. Just truth. No one touches her." Her tone didn't raise. Her voice didn't harden. But something in that room shifted. Men who feared nothing straightened their posture. No orders. No more words. Just acknowledgement. Because that sentence wasn't a warning. It was law. Later that night, there was a knock on my bedroom door. Not urgent. Not fearful. Just quiet. When I opened it, she stood there, hair slightly undone, jacket removed, sleeves rolled up, tired but composed. Not intimidating. Not cold. Not distant. Just a woman who looked like she had made a decision that changed something inside her permanently. She stepped inside. No guards. No phone. No walls.
Her voice was calm.
Do you understand now? I didn't answer. Not immediately. I just asked softly, understand what? She didn't move closer. She didn't touch me. Her voice was barely a whisper. That this wasn't supposed to happen. Her eyes softened in a way I had never seen. But it did. I held her gaze. She stepped closer, not to touch, not to kiss, but simply to exist in the same space. Voluntarily. I never meant to let you matter, she confessed, and it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't poetic, it wasn't even romantic. It was truth. But now, her breath shook. You do. She took a breath, slow, careful. And that means you are no longer protected by contract.
You are protected by me.
Not position. Not business. Not arrangement. By her. She didn't reach for my hand.
She didn't ask me to stay.
Instead, she said something much more dangerous. Tomorrow morning you decide. I felt my pulse quicken. Decide what? She looked at me, eyes quieter, softer, haunting. Whether you leave me now, while it's still safe. A pause. Or whether you stay, knowing it never will be again. Silence. No touch. No kiss. No plea. She simply turned and left, leaving me alone with the truth. Love in her world was not an emotion.
It was a choice.
And tomorrow I would have to make it. Love doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives like morning light, quietly entering a room you didn't realize had been dark. Sometimes it doesn't feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like clarity. The morning I made my decision, nothing dramatic happened. No storm. No threat. No crisis. Just sunlight through curtain cracks, pale and soft, brushing against the edge of my bed like a quiet question. I did not rush to make a choice. I didn't leap out of bed and run to find her. I didn't panic or freeze. I simply sat there, awake, fully awake, breathing slowly. And I knew before I even stood up. Not because it felt safe. Not because it felt certain. But because love, real love, is not made of safety. It is made of willingness. I went downstairs. The penthouse was quieter than I'd ever seen it. Guards present, but silent. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, it was waiting. She was in the atrium, standing by the glass wall, overlooking Manhattan. The city looked far away somehow, like something distant, blurry, unreal. She didn't turn when I entered. She knew I was there. I walked until I stood next to her. Not close. Not touching. But beside.
She didn't speak. Neither did I.
At first. Then, I did not tell her I had decided to stay. I did not declare love. I did not give some romantic speech. I simply did something utterly ordinary, something people in safe worlds do every day. I reached out calmly, gently, and took her hand. Not quickly. Not desperately. Not shaking. Steady. Her eyes closed. Just for a moment. And in that moment, I realized something extraordinary. It was not that I had chosen her. It was that, perhaps for the first time in her life, she had been chosen. Not for her power. Not for her last name. Not for her beauty. Not for her empire. For her. She didn't speak for a long time. Nor did I. She didn't turn toward me. Didn't move. But her hand tightened around mine just slightly. And then, when she finally looked at me, her eyes were not guarded. Not cold. Not fierce. They were something I had never seen on her. Not fully. Not vulnerably. They were soft. And terrified. And open. She didn't ask, "Are you sure?" She didn't say, It won't be safe. She looked at me, as if memorizing something invisible, and whispered, I don't know how to deserve this. I squeezed her hand. It's not about deserving. That was all I said, because that was all that was true. Something shifted then. Not in the air, not in the room, in her. Something gave way, quietly, gently, the way ice melts, not in a crack, but in a quiet surrender. She stepped closer, just a little, still holding my hand, then let out a breath, long, slow, relieved. She looked at our hands, still joined, and whispered, then this, she paused, it won't be a contract anymore. I nodded once.
No.
It won't. She looked back at me. What will it be then? I didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, I said, something that might break us. She held my gaze and nodded. Yes. Neither of us called it love. Not yet. We didn't need to. It had already decided. Later that afternoon, the world tried to go back to normal, but there was no normal now. The contract still existed, legally, publicly, but between us, it was already unraveling. She walked differently now. Not ahead of me, not behind me, but beside me. The guards watched, quieter than usual, as if confused, as if unsure, because something had happened that their rules did not cover. One of her advisors, a stern woman named Eloise, with silver-rimmed glasses and a mind like a blade, approached Vivian while we were both in the garden lounge. She didn't look at me, only at her. You've made your decision then, she said. Vivian didn't deny it, didn't excuse it, didn't hide it. She simply said, yes. Eloise studied her for a long moment, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something human flicker in her eyes. Respect. She nodded. Then understand. The moment you make someone your boundary, your enemy looks for ways to break it. Vivian didn't look away. Then let them try. That night, something remarkable happened. Nothing dangerous. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. Something human. We cooked dinner. Together.
Badly.
I chopped vegetables too slowly. She overcooked the pasta. We didn't talk about danger. We didn't talk about risk. We didn't talk about the ring, or her father, or warnings, or threats. We talked about childhood. About colors. About how she had once wanted to be a violinist. And how I had once wanted to build homes. And how, somehow, we had both ended up in worlds that broke pieces of us we didn't know could break. At one point, while I was laughing, actually laughing, not politely, not nervously, but freely, I saw her watching me. Not smiling. Something quieter than smiling. Something deeper. She didn't interrupt. She didn't force the moment. She just watched. Like she was learning it, memorizing it, safeguarding it. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being seen. Because she wasn't looking at me like I was fragile. Or like I was in danger. Or like I was hers to protect. She was looking at me like I was something worth witnessing. That night, before she went to her room, she paused. Just before the stairs. Not close. Not touching. But connected. In a way that didn't need proof. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say goodnight. She said something else. Something small. Something rare. Something more intimate than I had ever heard. She looked at me and whispered, sleep safely. And for the first time, I did. Not because the world was safe, but because even in danger, my choice had given me peace. That night, I didn't dream of running. I didn't dream of hiding. I dreamt of a quiet kitchen, pasta cooked badly, hands brushing against hands, and a life that would never be safe, but might, somehow, be real. In every story, there is a moment when love asks a price, not through romance, not through poetry, not through soft words whispered in dim rooms, but through sacrifice, through risk, through the understanding that love is not measured by how safe you feel, but by who you stand beside when it is no longer safe at all. The consequences didn't arrive with violence, not immediately. They arrived with conversation, with warnings, with closed doors and low voices, and eventually with a choice. Not the one I thought I'd have to make. Not the one between leaving and staying. Something far more complicated. That morning began quietly. too quietly. Quiet in her world was not peaceful. It was loaded. Something waiting. I found her in the study, sitting but not reading, her phone in front of her, untouched, as though she had been waiting for me before she dared touch it. She didn't look up when I entered, but she said my name. Not directly, not even a greeting. Just my name, barely whispered, as though she was checking if I was still real. Carol. Just that. I stepped closer, and closer, until I stood right across from her. Then I saw it. The ring. Not the wedding ring. The other ring. The silver one. The one that meant blood, legacy, power, survival. She held it loosely between her fingers, not wearing it, just holding it. Like it was making a decision for her. Her voice was steady, but I could tell she was not. They are asking questions, she said quietly. Not about the contract. Not about the marriage. She looked up at me then, and there was no shield in her eyes. No guardedness. Only truth. They're asking what you mean to me. My breath caught. She let silence hang in the room, not cold silence. Loaded silence. Then she spoke, softer than ever before. And they're not asking because they are curious. My heart thudded once. Heavily. She looked at me, not like Vivian the leader, not like Vivian the public figure, not even like Vivian the woman I had kissed, but like someone who had finally understood the cost of caring. She never said the word love. She didn't have to. They want to know if you are a liability or a weakness. She swallowed softly. But the problem is you are neither. I stepped closer. Every inch I moved toward her felt like a declaration. I wasn't afraid. I didn't even tremble. Then what am I? I asked quietly. She held my gaze. The line. She said it slowly, like something sacred. The line between what I will do and what I won't. She paused. And when someone is the line, others will try to erase it. Then she did something she rarely did. She looked away. Not out of avoidance, but out of vulnerability. She wasn't protecting herself from me. She was protecting me from herself. And what came next? They saw how I looked at you, she whispered. Which means they know what you mean to me. She put the ring down. Carefully. As though it could shatter. And in my world, when they know what you love, she exhaled, slow, shaky. They don't try to destroy you. They try to destroy what you love. The room felt colder. The city outside felt distant. My pulse raced, but I didn't step back. Didn't flinch. Instead, without thinking, I moved closer. Close enough for her to hear my heartbeat. Close enough to make silence feel like contact. And I said the calmest, bravest thing I had ever said. Then let them try. Her eyes found mine instantly. Sharp. Searching. And beneath it, fear. Not fear of her enemies. Fear of losing something she had never meant to find. You don't understand, she whispered. I spent my whole life trying not to care because once you care, once you let someone in, her breath caught, you hand the world a weapon. Silence stretched between us. Then she whispered, not powerful, not cold, not commanding, just heartbreakingly human. I don't want you to be my weapon. I didn't answer with words. I answered with something stronger. I reached for her, very gently, and placed my hand against her collarbone, just where I could feel the faintest pulse. Just enough to say what I couldn't say aloud. I am not afraid of being someone you can't protect. I am afraid of being someone you never got to love. That was the moment she broke, not loudly, not visibly, but in her eyes. The kind of break that feels like release. Freedom. Something she had held too tightly for too long, finally letting go. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply softened. In a way I didn't know she could. Then she turned her hand, slowly, deliberately, and placed it over mine. Not holding it. Not pulling me closer. Just covering it. Gently. Carefully. Reverently. And whispered, then stay. Not because it is easy. Not because it is safe. But because you decided it is yours. We didn't kiss. We didn't embrace. Love, in that moment, didn't need to be touched. It just needed to be known. That evening, someone came to talk to me. Not a threat. Not an enemy. Eloise. Her advisor. Sharp. elegant, unsentimental. But today, she wasn't cold. She had that rare look people get when they realize something fragile is worth protecting. You must understand one thing, she said. Protecting her is a privilege.
But being loved by her, she paused.
That is a responsibility. She stepped closer. But her tone was not cruel. It was honest. Her enemies will not try to hurt her, she said softly. They've tried. They failed. Then her eyes met mine. They will try to hurt you. I didn't look away. I didn't tremble. I know, I whispered. Then Eloise did something I didn't expect. She nodded. Not disapprovingly. Not in pity. In respect. Then, she said, you are not a liability. And she walked away. That night, Vivian didn't ask if I was scared. She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't ask if I still wanted to stay. She simply sat beside me on the floor by the window where we first kissed, to look at the rain that wasn't there. Quiet. Still. And I understood. You don't stay in her world because it is safe. You stay because, somehow, it is worth the danger. She didn't say goodnight. She said something else. Something simple. Something real. I'll see you in the morning. And for the first time, there was no fear in that sentence. Only promise. Danger does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives in the most silent hour, in a hallway that should be empty, in the clicking of a door that shouldn't be open, in the way someone looks at you, not with hatred, but with knowledge. It was late, past midnight. The city outside was silent, and the penthouse felt unusually still. Not peaceful. Anticipating. For reasons I could not explain, I could not sleep. Something felt too quiet. I left my room and walked down the long hallway, barefoot, the marble cold beneath my feet. I didn't plan to find her, but I knew where she would be. The library. It was the only place where she allowed herself to think without defending herself. She was there, sitting in the corner by the window, not working, not reading, just sitting very still. I walked in slowly. She didn't turn, didn't glance at me, but she said quietly, "He's here." My heartbeat tripped. Who? She looked at me and I knew. I didn't need a name. Just the silence in her eyes told me everything. The man from the car. The one who smiled instead of threatened. The one who wouldn't hurt her. Because hurting her would mean nothing. He had come for me. "Do not be afraid," she whispered, and there was something strange in her voice. Not just protectiveness. Not just fear. Acceptance. He wants to show me whether I'm willing to pay a price. I felt my breath tremble. A price? She nodded once. Calmly. "To keep you." The air thinned. Time slowed. And then he entered. He didn't break in. Didn't storm the room. Didn't threaten. He just appeared in the doorway, like someone invited. He didn't look at me. He looked at her. Only her. He didn't smile this time. "They're asking questions," he said. "And someone must answer." He looked briefly toward me. Not cruelly. Just knowingly. "They want to see whether she will choose you over her name." The silence in the room felt like it could break through skin. He stepped forward. "So, choose." Vivian's face changed, but not into anger. Not determination. Something far more dangerous. Calm. The kind of calm that didn't come from control but conviction. She stood. Not between us. Not in front of me. Just beside me. Not hiding me. Claiming me. "This is not your decision," she said. Not harsh. Not loud. Just true. He studied her for a long moment. "You can't protect her from this," he murmured. "You know that." "I know," she replied, voice steady. "But I can stand with her during it." Silence again. He turned not to me, not to threaten, not to warn, but to Vivian. "Protection is easy," he said. "Love is costly." Her eyes flickered. "Then let it cost me." That silence was different. Heavy. Final. He didn't threaten me. He didn't take me. He didn't say we were safe. He simply nodded once and said, "Then it begins." And he left, leaving nothing but a door slightly open. I breathed again. I didn't realize I had stopped. Vivian didn't speak. I didn't either, until I gently whispered, "You didn't choose your father's world." She looked at me, eyes soft.
No.
I didn't. I stepped closer. But you chose me inside it. For the first time, she didn't hold back. Her walls didn't lower. They cracked. Fully. Beautifully. She didn't reach for me quickly. She reached slowly. Cautiously. Like I was something sacred. Her hands came up to my face, soft, trembling. Not with fear, but with relief. The kind of relief you feel when something heavy you've carried for too long is finally allowed to fall. I have never, she whispered, voice trembling, never chosen someone who wasn't temporary. My heart cracked open. Then don't choose me as something temporary. She breathed out, shaky, uneven, human.
Raw.
And then she kissed me. Not the careful, trembling kiss from before. Not hesitant. Not afraid. But real.
Deep. Slow. Certain.
A kiss not of discovery, but of recognition. Not asking. Not apologizing. Choosing. Her hands gently cradled my face, thumbs brushing my skin like she was memorizing it. Like she finally believed she was allowed to touch something without destroying it. I didn't rush. I didn't lean in harder. I didn't press. I just let it happen. Let it be what it was finally meant to be.
Real.
When we finally pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing softly, eyes closed like peace was new to her. When she opened them, she didn't speak immediately.
She just looked at me.
Fully. Openly. Then whispered, "No more contract." I shook my head gently. No more contract. Her voice softened to something I had never heard before, a kind of hope so fragile, it felt holy. So, what is this now? I didn't smile. I didn't joke. I didn't look away. I held her gaze and said, "Something that lasts." Those words didn't scare her. They steadied her. She didn't kiss me again. She didn't need to. There was a new kind of silence now. And this silence was not warning. It was promise. Later that night, we stood by the window, looking at the city not as something to protect ourselves from, but something we could face together. She took my hand, and this time it felt less like protection and more like unity. She didn't say forever. She said something much more honest. "Not safe," she whispered, "but real." And I smiled. Then it's ours. And it was. Thank you so much for being here and for believing in this channel. If you feel in your heart, you can donate with super thanks so I can focus more and more on this project. Your support helps me keep creating these love stories and bringing them to life for you. See you in the next video.